Welcome, everyone, to the onpoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, it is our season finale, and so you will get the last word this week.
We'll spend our time tonight answering your emails and letters and to do the best we can getting you answers.
We'll also have a special draw and give 3 lucky letter writers a copy of Richard Petty's new book. It's called Great Small Towns of Ontario.
It's June 28th, 2024, so let's get to it.
Partner, our last show of the season.
Yes, I know, we made it.
Give me some sugar there. Okay. We know, as you know, people who watch this program will also know, there are essentially 3 orders of business on this podcast. Number 1, we try to cover the main and important events of the week at Queen's Park. Yes. Number 2, we are constitutionally obligated to mention Bill Davis,
Yes.
former Premier of Ontario. And 3, my hometown of Hamilton. Now, am I missing anything?
I believe I'm usually required to mention Ontario planning law, but those are the big ones.
Yeah, I think we've got it all covered. So now let's get the Hamilton reference out of the way, shall we? We'll do that right off the top here. I am wearing this shirt today, ViaRail, because I went to see them perform at the Budweiser stage at Ontario Place last week, I guess a week ago today. I had never seen them perform live before, heard their music, but never seen them perform live. They were absolutely phenomenal. Saw them at Ontario Place. Did I mention that?
I don't know.
Opened by Bill Davis in May of 1971. Okay, there's a second one.
Checking 2 boxes.
Checking 2 boxes. There we go. The Arkells are from Hamilton. Max Kerman is the lead singer. He is the hardest working man in show business. Just an unbelievable act. Max and I bumped into each other at a Blue Jay game a couple of weeks ago. Sheldon, you want to bring that picture up? There we are. I snapped a little selfie of the 2 of us together, which was delightful. People, if you get a chance to see the Arkells perform, don't walk, run to see them perform. They are phenomenal. 15 Juno nominations, I think. Nominated 6 times for Band of the Year. Alternative rock and roll. They just blow the roof off the place, and I can't say enough about them.
You know, I'm not much of a live music person, but I will make an effort next time I see them in my neck of the woods.
Good. Okay, I'm glad. We're going to convert people one at a time if we have to. Next thing, you remember we were here a week ago, and I said to you that I was going to have lunch the following day with 95-year-old, 4-time Ontario Liberal leader Robert Nixon.
Yes, I do
recall. You do remember? And I said, what did I say I would do? I said I would report back. So I want to do that right now. Again, Sheldon, picture if you would, please. There we are. That's me on the right, incidentally. And that is Mr. Nixon on the left. Our little group of onpoli nerds got together for lunch. So Mr. Nixon, Greg Sorbera, another former Liberal Ontario treasurer, Dave Levac, the longest-serving speaker in the history of the Ontario legislature, Mark Littell, who's a former Brantford city councillor, Howard Brown, who's a longtime Liberal stalwart, 2 of Mr. Nixon's grandsons, Bob and Alex Stewart. And I'm telling you, he's going to turn 96 in 3 weeks. And he is absolutely brilliant. Mind as sharp as a tack, you know, quite healthy considering he's 95, almost 96 years old. We love, of course, talking about the stories of yesteryear, and he's also very plugged in about the stories of today. And in fact, if you can imagine this, he does a daily blog at almost 96 years old. And in one of his blog posts a couple of months ago, he mentioned that he thought Justin Trudeau should step down as prime minister, which is a tough thing for a fellow Liberal to say. But given the results in the by-election in Toronto St. Paul's of just a few days ago, I suspect he's not going to be the only one saying it now.
Well, and we do have a whole mailbag to get to, but I think we can spare at least a minute to talk about the result in Toronto St. Paul, a conservative win in not just a Toronto riding, but a Liberal stalwart riding in the city of Toronto. It's now the only seat citywide the Liberals don't hold, but just a real thunderbolt of a result in federal politics. But you can already see it reverberating in provincial politics as well. I mean, Bonnie Crombie was interviewed about the relationship with Justin Trudeau, and she, in answer to one question, actually said, well, you know, Doug Ford is actually a closer relationship to Justin Trudeau than she, as the Liberal leader, is.
That's a fact, actually.
Distance between herself and Justin Trudeau. A very, very interesting moment right now.
You know, there are Liberals saying, if the Liberals can't hold St. Paul's, which is one of the safest Liberal seats. It's been Liberal since 1993 on the new boundaries. They changed the boundary. I remember the Conservatives won it a couple of times in the 1980s when Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister, but it were very different boundaries then. It is overwhelmingly tenant-focused now. It has a disproportionate-sized Jewish community there, so you know that much of that community is unhappy with how Justin Trudeau has responded to the war in the Middle East. And, this is a lightning bolt for Liberals all over the country, to be sure.
And as you say, if they can lose in St. Paul, then there's no safe ridings.
True enough. All right, shall we get on with the show?
Let us get to the mailbag.
Let's do it. We are going to change up the format a little bit this week for our final program of the season. We're going to spend the entire show answering your letters and emails. You've been writing us at onpolitics@tvo.org. So, JMM, get us started.
Okay, this is an email from Daniel Couture, who writes, Dear onpoli, lately we've seen the TV ads where the Premier says, call me, how can I help? So my question, is a member of the public actually allowed to call the Premier or a cabinet minister directly, or do they have to be a registered lobbyist? It's not like calling your MPP's constituency office. To give you an example, I'm a member of the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers and the Canadian Automobile Association, and they are both lobby groups. So if I pick up the phone and I call a cabinet minister like Todd McCarthy, am I breaking the law? Does it make me a lobbyist for OSPE or CAA?
Daniel Couture. Okay. Is there a difference between being Joe Citizen and calling your MPP versus calling on behalf of an organization?
So in the law, there absolutely is. What we normally just refer to as lobbyists in the law are referred to as consultant lobbyists. And when they are acting on behalf of clients, there is a registry they are supposed to file documenting which MPPs, ministers, deputy ministers, et cetera, that they are speaking with and why. And if you've ever read the lobbyist registry, it's quite detailed, like who they list and what the topics are. Of course, in many cases, they just list every minister and every topic under the sun, and it's not like super illuminating, but we move on. That law, however, has a specific section that says that basically constituents calling an MPP about any sort of personal or local matter does not count as lobbying. Doug Ford is an MPP. So with very few exceptions, I think, if you were to answer the call in his email, or in his commercial rather, and call him up and say, Doug, let me give you a piece of my mind, you are probably not going to break the law. Maybe if you're a CEO of a major company or something. Now, Daniel mentioned he's a member of the OSPE, and engineers are a provincially regulated profession. So if he were to call up his MPP and start talking about the legal requirements for engineers and his ideas for how those should be changed, and actually sometimes that is a political issue, that would start to get into riskier territory. I would probably recommend against it. There is absolutely a difference between just calling up your MPP or even the Premier or a cabinet minister versus what the law sees as actual lobbying.
So essentially it's I'm calling as a guy versus I'm calling on behalf of an association.
Yes. And, sometimes people have gotten into trouble by not keeping a bright line between those two ideas.
Understood. Now, Daniel actually had a second part to his email, so I'm going to go on and read that part now. He writes, you recorded your onpoli show too early to have coverage of the announcement of the sudden closing of the Ontario Science Centre. That's quite right. I am appalled, Daniel writes. I work at a forensic engineering company with a structural department. I'm pretty sure that if we read through that hired report to the government about the structural damage to the roof of the Ontario Science Centre, we would be able to figure out how it could be repaired safely and for how much money. Neglecting timely repairs may be the cause, but if engineers can rebuild an underground parking garage without the building above falling on them, the Ontario Science Centre can be repaired. Can I say that I'm rather disappointed that they would close the Science Centre in the cowardly way that they did? My political brain tells me this scandal will be bigger than the Ontario Place mess with Terme. That's the luxury spa, of course. To you, your family, and JMM, have a good summer, Daniel Couture. Okay, a good opportunity to give us the latest on what's happening with the Science Centre story.
So, yes, Daniel's quite correct. This broke after we recorded last week's episode. The government suddenly announced the closure of the Science Centre.
5 o'clock on a Friday, eh?
Yes.
5 o'clock on a Friday, yeah.
Which, of course, governments are never trying to hide anything when they do that. Never.
No.
Now, there is, in fact, a substantial engineering issue. The engineering report that has been made public says that the issue is specifically a type of concrete roof panel that was widely used in the 60s and 70s called reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, or RAC panels. There have been some issues in the UK about RAC panel roofs collapsing, and so we knew that they were reused at the Science centre. They wanted to inspect the panels, and they have found that some, though a relatively small number, are at a high risk of collapsing in the next winter snow load. Now, to get to Daniel's point, the engineering report says that there is a risk here. It does not say that the Science Center had to be shut immediately. That is a determination that the government has made. The engineering report suggests that a relatively small number of these panels need to be replaced urgently. Some other people have looked at this report and said that you could probably even do it while maintaining operations at the Science Center. That is, of course, a matter of opinion, and we'll just say a disputed opinion between the government and its critics. The provincial government knew about these roof panels at least as early as January 2024. It has been revealed that actually the operators of the Science Center had applied for a building permit to do roof repairs earlier this year. That did not seem to go anywhere. And the Minister of Infrastructure, Kinga Surma, has said this week that she hoped that the building could be kept open until 2028, when, of course, the plan is to move the Science Center to Ontario Place. Obviously, that hasn't happened. The Science Center is closed. As we record this, the latest news is that the government is looking for some temporary location that they can move at least some of the exhibits to in between now and the opening of the new space at Ontario Place.
The Science Center has gotten more love this past week than in the previous 10 years combined. All the opposition leaders have gone down there to do events and try to bring attention to the situation. So what's going to happen next on this?
Well, the Toronto City Council this week is debating a motion to ask city staff to explore the options of having the city simply take over the Science Center. That is a big one. City Councillor Josh Matlow is the sponsor, or one of the sponsors of that motion. Former Chief City Planner Jennifer Keesmaat has suggested that the province should simply sell the structures of the Science Center to the city for $1. The city already owns the land. It's just the province owns the structures itself. The firm Moriyama Teshima Architects that was Raymond Moriyama's architecture firm that helped design or that did design the Science Center has offered their advice on how to fix the roof for free. There have been other offers by various wealthy individuals to help fund the repair of the roof if they can keep the programming open. So a lot of civil awareness of this right now. Frankly, and I knew obviously that this is a beloved building and that lots of people loved the Science Center. I have to say, a little bit surprised at just how much public outcry there has been.
A little historical aside here. We got the Science Center in Ontario, I guess it's the Don Mills area of Toronto in the first place, because former Ontario Premier John Robarts in the 1960s decided that young kids ought to like science. And he wanted a centennial year project built so that kids would have a fun place to come and learn about science. So that's why it's there in the first place. Been there for a very long time. We should also mention that we got a lot of mail about the Ontario Science Center from a lot of other people. So shout outs, I know we can't read them all obviously, but shout outs to Debbie Stinson, Beth Mousseau, Bill Mills, Julio Villar, and Alexander DeMello, who also sent in questions. So thanks to them. And with that, on to the next one. JMM, it's yours.
Okay, here is an email from Kevin Shaw in Petrolia, Ontario, who writes, Hi, Steve and JMM. After the recent provincial cabinet shuffle, I looked at the updated list of cabinet ministers and parliamentary assistants and noticed something that I think is a bit off. MPP Robert Bailey, Bob Bailey, is listed as the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Legislative Affairs. This ministry no longer exists. Upon further inspection, I can see that the title of every other parliamentary assistant is an exact name match to a corresponding cabinet minister. Is this a normal occurrence? I can't think of anyone better than the two of you to explain this oddity. Thank you for your time. Love the show. Kevin Shaw, Petrolia, Ontario. So our producer, Matthew Amara, reached out to Bob Bailey's office, and they replied saying, until we hear otherwise, MPP Bailey still has the same role as parliamentary assistant. He is also still a member on the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. I also reached out to the Premier's office and inquired, is Mr. Bailey still a parliamentary assistant? I did not receive a response from the Premier's office as we record this. It is worth noting that this isn't just a title, a pedantic point here. Parliamentary assistants get a modest pay increase relative to other MPPs. I think it's about 14-15%. So at the moment, unless somebody can clarify this, it appears that Bob Bailey is receiving a raise of public taxpayer dollars for being a parliamentary assistant to a ministry that does not exist.
This is too much out of Yes Minister on the BBC.
Yes.
I almost hesitate to fact check this because the ridiculousness of it is too good to check on whether it's actually true.
Well, I mean, we will update this on social media, I'm sure, if we get a clarification from the Premier's office or anyone else. But yes, very, very good catch from our viewer. And to
be continued.
One. Exactly.
Yeah. Next one, please.
Okay, here is an email from Ian Leach, who writes, "Hey guys, I have a question for the upcoming last episode before the summer break. In the United States, some states, such as New York and Michigan, subsidize Amtrak routes within their states. Chicago to Grand Rapids and New York to Niagara Falls, for example. Why doesn't Ontario do this with ViaRail rather than having GO trains competing for the same passengers, such as on the Kitchener line and the Pilot to London? Thanks, guys. Ian Leach."
Good question. And since it's public transit, you know who's going to get the first shot at answering this one. Go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, this has been a long-standing issue of like competition and what do you call it? Like almost like piracy between rival train systems. But the thing to remember is that like fundamentally Via and GO, they run trains on the same tracks, but they both come out of an era when the private rail lines were getting out of passenger rail service, and governments stepped in so that people weren't simply abandoned, and so that we didn't have to pile absolutely everybody into cars to replace that lost train service. But I mean, when I first got to Queen's Park more than a decade ago now, I mean, under the Wynne government, there was a lot of grumbling because when they extended train service to, I believe it was Kitchener, Via responded by cutting service almost immediately. And that was seen by some as functionally the Harper government saving money on the backs of Ontario taxpayers. Whether there was merit to that complaint or not, I will just say that the grumbling was real and pronounced. Why don't we have some kind of cooperation between Via and GO? Well, because they were built to do different things, right? GO historically was about serving the commuter market of people filtering into really the offices of downtown Toronto. Via was built to serve the intercity and interprovincial longer stretches. Now, obviously, in the year of our Lord 2024, there are areas where they clearly are overlapping. There's definitely an argument for them to cooperate. There have been programs in the past, and I actually don't know if it's active now, where you could like buy a Via ticket and get onto a GO train, or buy a GO ticket and get onto a Via. There have been like attempts at cooperation like that, but outright subsidy, like what we're talking about here, has not generally been part of the arrangement. I would almost argue that it should go the other way than what Ian is suggesting here, where you should actually have the feds subsidize GO travel. I mean, the GO just operates more frequent trains and a wider network within Ontario and in many ways. But regardless, why it has not happened is simply because it just hasn't been a political priority for both levels of government yet.
This is a classic Canadian story where different orders of government can't seem to get themselves organized in order to promote the best possible option for the traveling public.
Well, and also, frankly, disagreements about like what does the train system exist to do, right? I mean, we also are into almost a decade now of a Liberal government that has been on and off trying to decide whether it wants a high-frequency train system or a high-speed rail system between Toronto and Quebec City, and that's a whole other dispute, which I'm not going to get into for time's sake here, but just to say that it's part of the disagreement.
Let's go to our next email. This one is from Scarborough, and it starts, "Hi, JMM and Steve. What is the risk of brownouts we have in this province? During this heat wave we are having, is there a large risk for brownouts? Similarly, what's the protocol to deal with this? Is it just load shedding by industrial consumers? Will residential consumers be impacted? Thanks. Pirowin Namasivayam from Scarborough." Okay, JMM, start us off.
So, there is, frankly, always a risk of local blackouts, especially with weather events like the heat wave we just experienced last week. Viewers can remember the 2003, much larger, much of the continent was blacked out. Now, that was a very different issue, but mandatory standards do exist across North America. There are both governmental and cross-governmental groups that develop standards and maintain best practices, and also rank power grids on how reliable they are expected to be. There have been some warnings about Ontario, but frankly, there are warnings about all North American power grids these days about whether there are sufficient redundancies and whether investments are keeping up, that kind of thing.
Let's also point out that we are going to be building a lot more homes in the province of Ontario, which will require electricity. We are going to go, big guns into... Not big guns, that's a bad expression to use. Whole hog, is that any better expression to use?
We are in Hogtown.
We are in Hogtown, after right. Right, for electric vehicles, so that will presumably use more electricity. We've got a new Ontario subway line that's being built right now. It might be ready in 10 or 15 years. That will use a considerable more electricity. Are we prepared for all of that additional need?
Well, so with the caveat that I am not an electrical engineer, there's a risk of blackouts of basically just like running out of electricity. I'm not sure how large that risk is today in 2024. The power grid is complicated, and so a very local shortage is not the same thing as a systemic-wide shortage, right? There can be an immediate shortage in your neighborhood when everybody's air conditioning turns on at once, but that's not the same thing as us not having enough nuclear reactors in the province. That kind of 2003 style sort of total collapse that you and I experienced, and some of our listeners might be too young to remember, that's not something that I hear a lot about. I don't hear a lot of people worrying about that specific scenario. But there is a reason why the government is talking a lot about its investments in new nuclear plants, in hydroelectric dams up north. They are
small
even
modular reactors, that kind
the
of thing
new
too.
small modular reactor at Darlington. They are even softening a little bit on renewable power, which is kind of a big deal for conservatives. All of this is just about the fundamental impulse to keep the lights on. Tories do remember acutely that Ernie Eves lost that election in 2003. Maybe not entirely, but in no small part because people saw the power grid fail. And that's kind of a big deal in people's lives. So it's a policy question of how do we construct the energy grid. It is also very much a political question. And I know the government is focused on this because they are not acutely worried about what is coming in the next, 3 months or maybe even the next 12 months. But once you start to get a few years out, exactly those concerns you were talking about, electric cars and new homes and all of those new factories that we want to build here, that's raising some anxiety.
A reliable supply of electricity is, if it's not job one for the Premier of Ontario, it's right up there near the top of the list.
Yeah.
Hugely important. Okay, you've got the next one.
All right. Here is an email from Fred Water in St. Catharines, who writes, "Hi, Steve and JMM. In my youth, I was active in political parties, door knocking, sign putting up, and rally cheering, as well as attending provincial and federal party conventions, and even helped select a prime minister once. I met a lot of MPPs of all parties. Many went on to fame in high office. Deputy Premier Bob Welch was my neighboring MPP, as was Peter Cormos. But many others did not, perhaps remaining in the backbenches or as parliamentary secretaries or stuck in opposition. But they were good people and worked for their constituents diligently. In your years of research and actual observation, is there a member or members of the Ontario legislature who may have remained out of the spotlight or been forgotten who deserve to be remembered as great parliamentarians?" And that's from Fred Water of St. Catharines, Ontario.
And he goes on to say, "Love the podcast, love the agenda, love TVO. And Steve, over the years, I've done my best to bump you into a higher tax bracket by buying several of your books." I don't mind that, Fred. Thank you very much. I'm happy to pay more taxes if it means you buying more of my books. That's a beautiful thing. This is a wonderful question because it points to the fact that, well, let me just say this. I think people, I've been watching this stuff for a long time. I still think the vast majority of people get into public life because they want to make a positive contribution to their community, to their province, to their country. I think the vast majority of those who I have met are in it for the right reasons. I will say that. And let's keep in mind, 85% of the people who run for public office are going to lose. There's another big chunk that will win their seats but be backbenchers for their entire careers. There's an even smaller number that will be lucky enough to be chosen as cabinet ministers. There is an infinitesimal number of people who will go on to become party leaders, and then the smallest possible percentage .0000001% will go on to become a premier or a prime minister. So, to Fred's question, are there people who've made a great contribution to the province and it was maybe days ago and we've sort of forgotten who they are? Yeah, you bet there are. And I want to take this opportunity, Fred, thank you, to talk about three people. I'll do one from each of the three major parties. And I'm going to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring these pictures up so you can see who these folks are. For the Progressive Conservatives, I'm going to talk about that man on the right. That's Robert Elgie, seen here with the Premier of Ontario, Bill Davis, who put him in his cabinet. That's two Mr. Davis references today. If you can imagine this, Dr. Elgie was a brain surgeon and a lawyer. He got elected back in 1977. He was one of the most brilliant MPPs who ever served. He became head of the Workers' Compensation Board after his time at Queen's Park was over. He only served 8 years at Queen's Park, but they were very controversial years. Some of you may remember there was a massive trust company scandal during his time as consumer minister, and he actually had to have laws changed so he could go in on behalf of the province of Ontario and take over trust companies which were mired in fraudulent, malfeasant practice.
Wow.
And it was an absolute, it could have been a massive scandal, but Dr. Elgie's hand on the tiller really steered us through some very difficult times there. His dad, Goldwyn, was also an MPP back in the 30s and 40s, and Dr. Elgie died 11 years ago. For the Liberals, I'm going to mention the name Eleanor Kaplan. She was a triple threat. This is a picture I took of her, maybe a couple of months ago. She was a North York City Councillor, so municipal, an MPP, so provincial, and an MP, federal. And when the Liberals took over at the end of the 42-year-long Tory dynasty in 1985, Premier David Peterson gave her two very influential jobs. First, chair of the Management Board of Cabinet. Governments can't spend any money unless the Management Board of Cabinet approves those expenditures. So she had a very influential, sort of low-profile inside job on that occasion, but very important. And then after that, a very important high-profile outside job, Minister of Health. One of the best ministers of health, in my memory anyway, in the province of Ontario. She served at Queen's Park from 1985 to 97, and she just turned, last month, 80 years old. So, Eleanor Kaplan. And for my New Democrat choice, I'm going to go with a guy named Dave Cook. Dave is from Windsor. He served at Queen's Park from 1977 to 97, so a long run. A very influential education minister. After his elective time was done, he was then appointed to head up the EQAO, the Education Quality Assessment Office, to measure how well our students either were or were not doing in schools. Let me also say, this being Pride Month that we're in, just coming to the end of it, I'll mention that Dave was in the closet for his entire time in public life. He not unreasonably decided that in the mid to late 1970s, when he first got elected, that it could be very difficult, even ruinous to his political career to be out of the closet at that time. And I well remember him telling me a story of when, I'm trying to remember the occasion. I think it was a Halloween. And he was down in downtown Toronto, and he saw patrons going into a well-known gay establishment in downtown Toronto. And as they were either entering or leaving, there were groups of people there throwing stones at them and harassing the people who were going in and out. And he made the not unreasonable conclusion that it could be dangerous to my health in order to come out. He eventually did come out, and frankly, I'm honored that he trusted me in a column that I wrote for TVO.org to tell the story of his coming out. Dave's 72 years old, looks 10 years younger, is still making a difference in Windsor by being involved in various community endeavors. And anyway, those are three people, all of whom served Ontario well, Fred, that I think we all ought to remember. There we go.
I just want to add, I'm just old enough to remember some years of like when virulent homophobia was commonplace in not just in politics, but it is difficult to explain to, in some cases, some of our younger colleagues, right? Like just the stuff that people had to live through. And that's quite a story.
Okay, moving along. Here is an email from listener Bill Cowan, who writes, "Hi guys, love your Friday night show, never miss it. I wonder if there is any precedent for a party in power's cabinet to revolt against the premier. Mr. Ford's tactics, the letter writer says, regarding dreaming up new legislation to change the rules is quite disturbing. I am quite sure that if the late Bill Davis, oh my gosh, there's a third reference, was in his cabinet, he would object to these bully tactics. I think back to his removing the oversight of the conservation authorities. He's talking about Doug Ford here. If he changes the rules regarding the set dates for elections to prevent the other parties from fundraising enough to give him a battle, that is despicable and totally unnecessary. Could the sensible members of his caucus put a stop to this? Love the way you two recall political history. Keep this up. Well, okay, Bill, thank you very much for that. I think, can I go first on this one?
Go.
I think the best example of this I recall was at the federal level. The Globe and Mail's John Ibbotson just wrote a book called The Duel, which was all about the relationship between Lester Pearson and John Diefenbaker. And for this answer to this question, we got to look at Dief. Because Dief, during his time, I guess we're talking early 1960s here, had a full-scale mutiny happen in his cabinet. And John's got the blow-by-blow of this in his book. The question was, should we allow the Americans to have nuclear-tipped missiles stationed in Canada over which they would have control? And apparently the government of Canada at one point said, yes, you can do that. And then there was a huge debate in Diefenbaker's cabinet over it, and Dief wanted to take back the commitment that Canada had made on that. And cabinet was literally having a vote. I think he was actually out of the room at the moment when the vote happened. They were going to have a vote on whether to expel him as prime minister, to mutiny and expel him as prime minister. Somehow he managed to survive that vote, just barely though. But of course, it all contributed to bring his government down after just, what did he get elected? 57 for the first time, and he was out by 63. And at that time, he had the biggest majority government in Canadian history. So it was complicated, but that's the best example I can think of.
Before I get to a few other examples that I can think of, should we make a fourth Bill Davis reference?
Go for it.
Well, because the Beaumark missile controversy was also wrapped up in the cancellation of the Avro Arrow.
Yes.
And Mr. Davis, if I recall somebody's book about this matter, Mr. Davis struggled to win his first election because the Avro Arrow plant was in his riding.
Correct. He won that first election in 1959 by about 1,200 votes. He should have won by 15,000. Yeah. But you're quite right. All the people who built that plane lived in his constituency, and they were not happy with Tories because Mr. Diefenbaker canceled the Avro Arrow. Yeah, quite right.
So that's now 4 Davis references. We're really...
We've done our job.
Okay. So, but to get back to the question here, I mean, cabinet mutinies. I mean, one of the clearest examples I can think of provincially was, people may remember a few years back, then Toronto Mayor John Tory wanted to toll the Don Valley Parkway and the Gardiner Expressway, these highways into Toronto. And initially, Kathleen Wynne had said she supported the idea and was willing to make the necessary changes to have it go forward. And then there was a revolt in the Liberal caucus, and in at least some cases, the Liberal cabinet ministers did not want this to go forward, right? 905 members, GTA members of Kathleen Wynne's own party spoke privately against this whole idea, and she eventually dropped it. She found a different idea that saw different types of money go towards Toronto, but it was not about tolling the Gardiner or the DVP anymore. So these revolts do still happen. Similarly, I mean, we can even talk about Doug Ford, right? We know that he has faced revolts from within his caucus and within his cabinet on matters like the public health measures during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Restrictions, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, some of the measures that Bill has mentioned, I don't imagine we will see a revolt from the Tory caucus about that stuff. But I mean, that's the fun thing about politics. It does have the potential to prove someone like me wrong.
You know, now that you mention it, I can recall one other instance, and I'm not sure it would rise to the level of a mutiny where they were about to throw the Premier out. But during Dalton McGuinty's time as the Premier of Ontario, he tasked a former Attorney General named Marion Boyd to study the issue of whether or not the Muslim community should be allowed to use Sharia law under some circumstances. And Marion Boyd came back with a task force report that said, yes, there are circumstances under which we recommend that Sharia law be available to be used in the Muslim community. Many of the women in the caucus of Dalton McGuinty's Liberal Party, Liberal government, mutinied. Yep. They absolutely rose up and they said, we are not going to allow this. This may not be good for women. And as a result, McGinty shelved the report and the issue disappeared. And he didn't even have a press conference to announce that. I think he let somebody scrum him on the way out of Queen's Park one day. Nothing formal, just said, nope, we're not going to do it. That's it. Into his car he got and away he went.
Yeah, and I mean, they would later go further, as I recall, in that there had been a longstanding practice where in family law cases, some Jewish families were allowed to rely on Jewish religious law.
Yes.
And quietly, the government said, we're going to just move away from all of this entirely. So yeah, that was actually a pretty consequential revolt in the end.
Indeed. And finally, here is an email from a listener named Nadia Thomas from Toronto who writes, hello, JMM will recall that a longtime viewer phoned the TVO studio to inquire about the origin of the wonderfully nerdy T-shirt that he wore on the May 17th show.
I'm just going to interrupt you to say it was this shirt.
Oh, it was the same one?
Yes, I made sure to wear this shirt again because of this letter, this wonderful letter.
Cool. And
it's
all
Godzilla and Rodan and various other characters.
Okay. Well, she goes on to say, JMM very kindly took the time to relay back through TVO staff the details about the online store where his wife had bought the shirt. What JMM may be interested to know now is that the caller was my 89-year-old mother, Marjorie Thomas, who was perhaps his biggest superfan. She also, of course, loves you too, Steve. Okay, thank you. My mother has been a lifelong and passionate observer of the profound impact that local and provincial politics can have on our daily lives, and of how ordinary little people can make a difference. As I later came to learn this week, my mother asked about JMM's T-shirt so that she could acquire one for her grandson, my son, Theo, as a high school graduation gift. He, too, shares JMM's love of all things nerdy, and she has no doubt now recruited him as our family's next generation fan of the show. See photo of my mother and Theo in his new shirt.
Oh, that's amazing.
Look at that. Isn't that adorable? My mother is also one of the most kind-hearted and intelligent people I know. She retired as a Scarborough General Hospital burn unit and wound care nurse in 1988. But continued working tirelessly, serving local Malvern dermatology patients and volunteering with community agencies well into her mid-80s. She is still a force to be reckoned with, and this year she turns 90 years young on July 17th. My mother doesn't know that I'm writing to you, and it may be a tall ask, but as your biggest fan, JMM, I know that she would be just thrilled to receive an on-air shout-out for her birthday, perhaps on your all-mailbag final episode this week. Nadia Thomas. There you go. Isn't that fabulous?
This is
Beautiful.
This has been wonderful. Moving to TV has been a big change for me. Of the two of us, I have substantially less broadcast experience. So this is wonderful. This might be just the best thing that has happened all year. Marjorie, Nadia, thank you so much. A very, very happy early birthday to Marjorie. And to Theo, congratulations on graduating high school. That is a big deal, and you should be proud. If you managed to do it in less than 7 years, you're doing better than I did. Hug your grandmother. She loves you very much.
That's great. And if I can come full circle here for a second, her birthday is July 17th. That is Bob Nixon's birthday. Let's go back to the top of the show there. Yeah, nice coincidence. Now, what is the story about 7 years to finish high school here?
You know what? We're going to save that. I'm going to save the salacious details of my life for the next season of the TV show, and we'll give people a reason to tune back in the fall.
Now, I think I might have said 1988 on the when she was a wound care nurse, but it's 1998, right? Have I got that right now?
Yes, 1998.
1998. Let's make sure we get the date right there. Oh, and as long as I'm correcting, I think I said Charles Sousa last week was Etobicoke Lakeshore, and it's not. It's Mississauga Lakeshore. So we're going to get all these corrections out of the way right away.
All these corrections.
Phew. Okay, that was a marathon mailbag, and I think we've got to the end of it.
I think we have. So yes, thank you to everyone who sent in a question. If we didn't get to your question on the show, we did still enter your name into the draw.
And Matthew O'Mara made this highly technical, very impressive. What do we think this is?
I'm not sure if it was a Timbits box or a Tim Hortons coffee or something.
It's
but
something.
Yes.
We're going to pluck 3 names out of this box now, and people are going to have a chance to win this book. This is Richard Petty's latest, Great Small Towns of Ontario. And JMM, do you want to do the first honors here?
Our first winner is Alexander DeMello,
who sent us a question earlier. Okay, I'm going to do the second one here. And the winner of a second Richard Petty book is Mark Fairclough. Fairclough. Okay, that's the second one. Let's do one more.
One more. Karen Pingree as our third book recipient.
Excellent. So we will get books sent out to the three of you folks, and we thank everybody for their letters and emails to our program. It's a beautiful thing. And that is the OnPoli podcast for this June 28th, 2024.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org, and we always ask you to include your first and last name and where you're writing from.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell, Christine Gardner, Carla Lucetta, and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. Stacey Dunseith is the executive producer of The Agenda. John Ferry is vice president of programming and content.
Special thanks, as always, to our wonderful crew for making the podcast look so darn good. And as I have been, is it a tradition if you've only done it a few times? Why not? As we do every week, we want to give a special shout out to someone on our crew here. And today, follow me.
Okay.
Today, we are going to do a special shout out, JMM, because as you know, there is somebody who is leaving us and who has decided to retire. I don't know why she would make such a terrible decision, because I don't know how we're going to do this program without her. Hello, Ms. Barton.
Hello.
Now, would you stand for your interview here? This is Lorraine Barton, who, okay, there's your camera over here.
Hello.
Lorraine is retiring after how many years here at TVO?
11.
And can you tell us why you're making this inexplicably bad decision for us?
Well, the truth of it is I travel about 4.5 hours every day to get here and back, and I'm sick of it. All right?
You live in Mississauga.
I do.
And it's a bus and a subway to get here, right?
2 buses in the subway. Yep.
2 buses and a subway.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a bit much.
Yeah.
Do you see all these people who are here?
Oh, my God. I'm glad I put my shoes on now.
Lorraine is the assistant director of this program, and we don't get on or off on time if not for Lorraine, right?
A number of times I've forgotten my pass alone, and she's had to get me in here. Yes.
Now, Lorraine, what do I give you every Monday morning when I come in?
You give me the New York Review because it has the crossword at the back of it.
Okay, so I happen to hold this mic for a second.
Thank you.
All right, and point it in my face. I happen to have here, okay, here's this week's New York Times Magazine.
Right.
And, you know, as per my usual habit, I'm bringing it in, but this time, some of the folks here have put a special crossword in the back instead, and this one's called, can we see this, David? This one's called All About Lolo, and Lolo's your nickname, of course. They made this crossword puzzle with all these clues.
Wendy's favorite cheese.
This is all about you.
Feeds the soul.
So this is, you know, when I say it's got your name on it?
Yeah.
It really does.
Skinny legs in Corey. Birthday twin and favorite crossword. This is fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.
Lorraine, can I say, on behalf of everybody here, we're really going to miss you to bits. We love you. We love your wonderful accent. We love what you've brought to our program.
Yeah.
We love that you are such a happy person here and a joy to work with. We wish you well with whatever comes next. And we have, I think, a few more seconds to try to convince you not to do this.
All right, I won't.
It's a deal. It's a deal.
Offboarding seems to be arduous.
Now, I don't know how we're going to sign off this show if I'm talking to you. Do you want to sit back down and get us out of here?
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, incidentally, that's Sheldon. You know how I talk to Sheldon all the time? That's Sheldon. Okay, and with that, we're out of here. Until next season, everybody, thanks so much.
See you in September.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.